Okay, welcome everybody. That's perfect. Thank you so much. Okay. And everyone on Zoom, we're going to have a wonderful reading and time with Crystal Odell, and I want to introduce her to you. So Crystal is the author of Trans Studies, which was on the advertisement that we made, the graphic. Which is from Goldline Press, published in 2025, and chapbooks editor at Newfound. Crystal Odell, she is a storyteller of trans polyamorous horror praxis, writing and revising into the desire for something like a life. Their stories have appeared in Black Warrior Review, Split Lip Magazine, Apogee, Many Worlds, Strange Horizons, and elsewhere. Crystal was a Lambda Literary Fellow and Tin House Scholar, nominated for Best of the Net and anthologized in Permanent Record Poetics Toward the Archive from Nightboat Books, and We're Here, the Best Queer Speculative Fiction. She writes RPGs at Fever Dream Games and serves as academic and administrative coordinator for the Department of Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies at WashU. So help me to welcome Crystal. Let me let in a couple people from the okay. Okay. All right.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Good enough, at least.
Yep, good enough.
Good. Thanks for having me here, everybody. Every time I get in a situation, get myself into a situation like this, I end up asking myself, how am I here? Why am I here? Why me? Why am I here in this classroom with you all today? I feel eternally grateful to be for you to give me any of your time and attention today, especially this is Trans Awareness Week. So it feels, I guess, like a lot of pressure, but also really important to speak to you today about writing, specifically about the writing of trans experience, my specific trans experience. Hearing somebody like repeat this bio, this thing that's supposed to be me, it all feels a little bit distant. This is like the accumulation of things over a 10-year period, and I would say is the propelled by continuing to ask this question: why am I here? How am I here? About a week ago, Kay, Allison Hammer, and I had an initial conversation about what am I going to speak about today? What would be useful to you or interesting at all? And I can't remember the specific quote. Please fill in the details. But I heard that you read something related to queer or trans experience and imagination, and thinking about the link between these two things. And that's started me on a bit of a journey over the last week, and that I want to ask you to come along with me on. I find myself, when I get asked to do something like this, using them as opportunities to learn hopefully learn with you. At the time when I was asked to do this speaking engagement, I was rereading a book that I wrote many years ago, 8 years ago. It's a novel published under my dead name, or my old name, in what feels like another life. And I don't know what spurred me to start reading this book, but everything started to make sense, and I've been writing notes. Those notes turned into a slideshow, and maybe an essay is coming out of this. I'm not entirely sure. So again, I'm just very grateful to be here with you to ask some questions. I'm going to start a slideshow, and kind of walk you through what's been turning over in my head over the last few weeks. And then I would love to have a conversation with you, take any questions that you have, and just really hear from you about your experiences as well. I know I asked you, or I suggested maybe to read a new story of mine called Crosses, which we could also talk about if that is of interest to you. Again, I think always in these situations, it's like, I want to know what's helpful to you, or as you begin to ask yourselves this question, why am I here? Why are you here? How are you here? Where are we going? Okay, I'm going to attempt to share my screen.
If you have any issues, I think I need to maybe make you a co-host, but let me make sure that it might not be true. Let's see. Or make you host. I'm gonna make you host. Okay. Okay. You should be able to now.
Let's see.
Yep.
Is there a slideshow?
You have to pick a screen that you want to share. There should be a bunch of options on your screen right now, maybe, of what you want to share.
How about now?
Nope. Up, got it.
Okay. Yeah, let's see. I'm not sure if anybody's familiar with this term transvestigation. It's not a good it's not a good thing. It's not a good look. If you're not familiar with transvestigation, that goes along. There's these sort of like social media accounts, TikToks and such, that look at celebrities and ask, like speculate that these people were trans, like very popular celebrities, politicians, athletes, and make these wild claims about their faces, their shoulders, their voices, their gait, their speech, and begin to sort of deconstruct their being in the world and make these wild claims about that these people are indeed trans. Of course, these are a lot of times racist claims or misogynistic claims based on this belief that there's some kind of gender is about biology, and that biology is very strict science. I'm sure you've talked about or like debunked a good deal of that in class already. So I won't necessarily go into that, but I've been recently curious about my own work and looking into kind of the last 5 or 10 years of writing and wondering about in what ways has my writing tracked my own trans experience? What ways does that show any kind of change or like leave the impressions that the change of my psyche as I've undergone transition socially, medically, how has it manifested in my imaginative practice broadly? So I want to kind of take you on that journey today and see what comes out here. Yeah, the big question here is how has my writing and writing women changed with transition? I'm not, I wouldn't subscribe to this idea of this, that I was born a woman, born in the wrong body. That narrative doesn't quite feel accurate. And yet, you know, I think we end up finding ourselves in these questions, or I find myself struggling for so many years asking, okay, well, if I wasn't, if there's no innate sense of of womanness in me, like it's all a construct, then why the desire to be a thing? Why risk losing one's family, friends, going through years of discomfort to have this thing that has a theoretical origin? And like, what is that origin, right? If we continue to kind of like ask these questions, gender is performance, again, gender is not biological, then it's like, what is the drive to do this thing, to be this thing that risks so much? In asking these questions over the years, I've done a lot of reading in trans studies. In some way, I think trans studies is a weird place. In some ways, it can be very critical, and there's maybe some infighting that's not super helpful. People trying to stake claims of what is and what isn't gender, what's valid, what's not valid, in their own pursuit of understanding themselves, which is what humans do, right? We want to know and we want to think we know. We want to be assured, because to not be is really uncomfortable. I have mostly read, I would say, to find other people asking these questions and to find community in asking the question, who am I? What is gender? Why are we on this path? Where am I going? Where are we going? And I found a lot of great answers. If I have a reading list at the end of this, but if you read any book or any of the recommendations that I make today, I strongly recommend reading Marquise Bay's Black Trans Feminism. It's radically kind of shifted my thinking, kind of like unloosens me from the question of asking why am I this way, and kind of like focusing my attention on how am I in the world, how do I manifest. And I think that like one of the answers that this illuminates, has illuminated for me, is that, well, what transness is, just like queerness, is asking the question. If you begin to ask yourself the question and these questions stick with you, you find yourself engaging in some kind of social, sexual practice, and you begin to notice that the conventions, that the gender is blurry, or you're switching in gender, or you find yourself in unstable ground. You might begin to see yourself as, oh my God, this is trans, and I think that's there's something there that, like, when those questions begin to take root, not necessarily in the form of doubt, but as a sort of like confidence that we wear, asking the question why propels me forward. I see something about myself and I like it, and that desire, the move toward desire, arguably is one answer as to what transness is. And I think I hope that that's maybe what we see in this writing today. I don't want to get lost too much in the theoretical. I think looking at some practical examples is just kind of neat. So here we go. Let's just dive in. This is I wrote a novel in another life. I think it came out in 2018, but I finished in like 2015 or 2016. And the closer it came to publication, the date of publication, the worse and worse I felt. And as soon as the novel was published, I was pretty crushed, which is such a privileged bullshit thing to say, because you've got a book in the world, baby, and like, it's pretty cool. I just couldn't shake the feeling that like what I was putting in the world was not me, and I couldn't put my finger on exactly why. I think somebody on Goodreads, I'm on Goodreads, and somebody on Goodreads, I remember, wrote, I think, a 2-star review. They were very generous. And they gave me a 2-star review of this book, saying, describing it something like it was 300 pages of a boy learning how to deal with the friend zone. And I laughed, right? I laughed until I cried, because that's how I saw the book as well. I think that people, when they read the book, identified the author as this boy who's writing about boy experience and acritically, kind of removed and at a distance from the experience of women. And of course, that's true. I mean, that's how I've been living for decades. What did I know about being a woman? What did I know? So here's some quotes from the book. The book switches points of view. The first paragraph here is from a boy's point of view that's infatuated with her in a dangerous way. And he's describing seeing her on the cheerleading team. And after this game, she goes off with some guys on the other team and kind of acknowledges that that's a betrayal, but minorly accepts that that's also kind of there's something deviant about that. And I think this begins to this is a very small, like a peek into my, at the time, admiration, my admiration for women, okay, but specifically for like high femme women, sluts, for lack of a better word, and not in the sense of like, because sexual liberation is one thing, but I think my admiration extended more into the field of admiring somebody who could be brave enough to be an object of public disgust, right? That you could be a slut or a whore or like this thing that people reviled, and do so proudly, or as proudly as you can, encountering social stigma. The second paragraph, I think, is, this is written from this character's point of view, Tiffany. And let me say about this paragraph. I can say a little bit about how this book was written, which is from a classic, what I was taught is like the way to write a novel, a third person point of view, right? He, she, they pronouns, from a distance, and also a sort of psychological distance that was very difficult for me to keep as I was writing this book. The idea of writing fiction at the time is that the author is not the characters, right? The author is not the narrator. There's a sort of authorial persona that persists. This extends into poetry as well. But when you read a poem or you read a work of art, you can't assume that the values, the beliefs of a work of art are the ideas, the beliefs of that author. That's amazing. If that's your thing, if that's what you need to do, that's great. I don't want to shit all over that. I will say that behavior, for me, that was a psychological problem. I think this idea that of fiction, this distance between what one was and what one could be, reality, and in one's daily life, and then what one imagined, oh, if only, right? That's the if only, the things that I hoped and dreamed and wanted for myself, existed only in my head. And that there was, again, a remove between those things. I couldn't actually be them. Okay, let's move on to see if there's hopefully things will begin to come together. Again, this is a work in progress, and you're very generous to be here with me today. These are kind of like a series of notes I've been scribbling down, again, continually searching for a thread here. I want to move into one of my favorite writers, Elle Nash. She's a cis woman, and I'm thinking of Tiffany's character. I'm thinking about these women that I've admired, kind of like growing up and not exactly knowing why. This is from her essay, "The American Bimbo as a Site of Spiritual Struggle." Incredible essay, top to bottom. And she, in this paragraph specifically, she's talking about why she ended up getting a boob job. This is a woman who struggles publicly, has written about struggling with disordered eating, wanting to kind of like waste oneself away, and then at some point making a decision to toward beautification, right? This sort of like taking up space. And I love the way that Elle writes about both of these moves, both as I think she doesn't glorify disordered eating and the trouble here, but she also doesn't kind of throw young women under the bus for doing what they need to do to have a sense of autonomy and bodily control within a world that consistently wants to socially police us, um, socially and legally police our bodies. Specifically, this paragraph calls my attention. I'm going to sort of read in the middle here. I didn't get breasts because I wanted people to comment on them. And I would dare say I did not even get them for attention, even if some attention can at times be uplifting. That's good. That's good. Uplifting. Okay. Also, though I'm attracted to women in the female form, and maybe there is something to me becoming more like what I am attracted to, which is also a way of saying I am coming to a place of loving myself by using the tools that money and plastics can bring me. I find this, again, fascinating because I think there's, if we kind of like expand the question from just transness and gender, we're thinking about this is now maybe like a tired conversation, but expanding the idea of gender affirming care to include all kinds of care that cis and trans people experience. I might even say, like I think one could probably argue that, getting, any kind of hair transplants or boob job or maybe even fertilization treatments is a kind of like, if that's related to one's sense of purpose in the world or a sort of gendered experience that you want to have or embodied experience, let's say, that you want to have, then these things are gender affirming care. And of course, I think that we can talk very deeply, very critically. Everybody has a hot take about what is acceptable, what is not acceptable, what is the origins of the pressures of the decisions that we make. But again, what I love most about Elle is that she allows for the individual to make these decisions, for us to fuck around and find out, rather than kind of, and to learn, right? To trust the person, to trust each person to make a decision, experience a thing, learn, and hopefully move on from that, rather than kind of like asserting dominance over other human beings' bodies and choices, but to think that we know better for somebody else. And I think the trajectory of her life and her writing are an amazing example of that. So where are we in this conversation? I'm, again, sort of stuck with this. One of my favorite quotes by Gloria Anzaldúa: "Nothing happens in the real world unless it first happens in the images in our head." at some point, maybe it was 2018, this kind of quote lodges in my imagination. I cannot shake it. That this distance between what I feel like doing and what I allow myself to do is a contradiction, is a form of self-protection, but more a variety of cowardice. And I less and less can I stand with it. Um, of course, there's a lot of pressures for why not listen to desire. Um, I'm a child of the 80s, and I grew up with a lot of messages that being trans was not a very desirable thing to be. I grew up with a lot of talk shows like Jerry Springer and Donahue and these kinds of things that paraded trans people out as a freak show. They would come out and they would show you how scandalous their lives were. And it was sort of like a big reveal moment that they were not the gender that you thought they were. They were deceivers. They were literal. They were prostitutes, deceivers, and therefore they were unlovable. Recently, I've also become fascinated with the field of psychoanalysis, which is a very strange place to find oneself in. But there's a lot of exciting work that's going on in psychoanalysis. Please ask me about this at some time, DM me or whatever. But here's a small quote from Matthew Lovett's Lacanian Anxieties, kind of going over this idea of like the original conception of like why was transness a problem is because there's this mischaracterization of trans people as cheating desire, right? That each human, that there are men and there are women, and each one of them has this unresolvable lack because of their gender. And that what trans people were attempting to do was sort of cheating the system, that a trans person, like a trans woman, might think that I can be whole if I become a woman, without realizing that women have, most women do not feel total self-fulfillment, right? Like, you know, most cis women are walking around just as like these like fulfilled Buddha type beings, right? So this idea that one could resolve that lack with gender was misconstrued. And however true that might be, that's not necessarily a good reason to not do it, right? Because as Matthew Lovett points out, the whole point of this isn't about getting rid of that lack, but moving toward desire, which is what any cis person does anyways. You're constantly finding ways. You have these desires that move you to have a particular type of life. You know, you want 2 kids, you want to have a house, maybe you don't, you want to live unmarried with your partner and go on amazing trips. All of these are expectations for the shape of your life, moved by desire, and kind of doing that in it might be a non-normative way that trans people do it, but it's sort of like a mischaracterization that this is in some way not what everybody does. Okay, so I'm just going to give you a few more examples, kind of walk you through this journey, and then we'll like kind of like close this out and open it up for questions, hopefully. So 2018, this book came out. Things are at a distance. My world is rocked. Some trans friends of mine begin making me ask some very deep questions about my life, and I am suddenly non-binary person who writes their first short story from the perspective of a trans girl. And this is written a year before I started HRT, well before I identified as a woman, again, constantly in this state of being like, what do I know about being a woman? But I find myself using fiction to speculate for the first time, kind of intentionally, what might it be like to live as a woman? what might transition mean for me and be like for me. And no surprise, in this short story, years later, looking back at this, kind of, I would say so, it's hard to say that this work is fiction. Yes, the events in the story aren't entirely true, but the bodily discomforts are these moments of um, being intensely uncomfortable in a one piece at a public pool, or losing my mom's, my bio mom's, losing her because of coming out as trans for many years. All of these things ended up happening over the next 4 or 5 years. And um, at the time, if you would have asked me if my mother would be there to support me, I would have said yes. I would have thought that my dad was the one who was going to bail, and somehow the writing knew better. So here I'm using kind of like writing as a speculative space. What might it be like to transition, to see myself as a trans subject? Fast, let's keep moving. 2021, maybe. I am a few years into taking HRT. Maybe I might be using they, she pronouns at this point. Getting she for the first time, and yet like walking out into the world feeling intensely unreal and caught between this space of feeling both as yeah, we'll just say unreal. And I began going out. This is sort of like a series of stories I began to write, going out on online dates with cis guys for the first time in my life, and seeing what that was like. From a distance here, like looking at the writing itself, the style has changed dramatically. And I think that's again saying something here. Suddenly I am writing from a first person point of view. I'm writing in present tense, and I'm writing about my lived experience. I still would describe something like this as, I think at the time you began calling this nonfiction, but putting the non very annoyingly in quote or in parentheses, nonfiction, these kind of porous parentheses, to kind of nod toward how even in writing one's lived experience, it's hard to call this the truth. There's weediness there, like how much of the dialogue is misremembered. Maybe I'm portraying my mood in a particular way here that actually doesn't need to. Maybe I was very happy during this moment and feeling super fulfilled by being out on a date with this guy. But in rewriting and remembering this story, I'm kind of like just giving you those seeds of doubt. And of course, time. Time is condensed in stories like this. There's so many details that are omitted, but it's really hard to say that this is true. It's more so kind of like a memory. It's how we remember how a thing happened, which is not necessarily how it happened, which becomes intensely troubling if we think of who we think we are as people are strings of memories. And if our memories aren't entirely true, are we real, or how real are we? If we make any connection, like how could we make different strings, like pull this string, connect this string to different memories to have a different version of ourselves or different idea of who we are as people? Needless to say, my reality is it's tenuous at best here. And here's some dialogue here. This is at the very end, some kind of, there's a server, my date goes to the bathroom or something like that, and the server brings over, he orders cheese fries on a date, which I thought was very, very interesting. And the server at the very end here brings over the cheese fries, and she gestures at herself, as this happened many times. I was like, you're so beautiful and brave. I don't know how many times I've gotten called brave and beautiful. And that's, every time you call, like, see a trans girl and say she's beautiful, you're being like, oh, I see that you're trans. That's all we're hearing. I see you're trans. So I'm sort of like writing into this. Also, I think at the very end here, few women doll like I do, which draws attention but conjures the intended mirage, me. If the game's realness, trying is failure. At this time, I'm coming into myself as a kind of like high femme woman. You know, she wears a lot of makeup. You know, her skirts are shorts. You're probably going to catch me in heels if you find me around. So, um, I also have this very turfy voice in my head at the time that's like, you know, constantly criticizing myself, like this idea that like, oh yeah, this biological man who becomes a woman, of course, is going to do so as a caricature or this of what he thinks a woman is, right? This sort of like um, object of male desire, which I, of course, need to kind of like unpack or have needed to unpack and kind of like dismantle that essentially horizontal violence between women attempting to stake claims between like what is acceptable behavior and unacceptable behavior. But essentially, what we're talking about is bodily autonomy, this sort of like core phobia that gets thrust onto women, and this constant denial that women can have desire or can do a thing simply because they want to do a thing or enjoying a thing. And I hope that kind of trend continues in like feminist circles. Our last example I'll look at is sort of like my most recent rating, which I'm not going to say that this is like a happy ending or anything like that, but things have changed a lot over the years. This is from a work in progress where I'm essentially writing about it's like less self-deprecating. I would say what I am, again, who I am is not necessarily being constantly criticized or like I'm not standing on wavy ground anymore. I am a woman of trans experience. And these are my experiences living in the world, dealing with people. And I think, again, that's sort of like movement, this inability to stand a distance between imagination and my reality. I just keep using that sort of like that engine to thrust me forward. For instance, again, here's a picture of me doing a reading just a few months ago, and I'm constantly thinking about the ways in which I can dissolve that barrier between fiction and reality. And not because I don't think reality is real, but to kind of call attention to the ways in which if you want a thing badly enough, you should have it and you could make it, right? You could do it. You just have to, if especially if you have people who want that too. And that's something that we can excite in ourselves. And I want to be the kind of person who like I know the world is a scary place, but I want to be that kind of person that's like, well, I can risk it, right? Like I can risk, or I'm willing to risk being as out as possible and to go, baby, you can have anything that you want. You deserve it, like because that's what dignity is. And even if other people think that your mother thinks you're ruining your life. So I'd say that's like what's at stake here for me. Um, I'll I don't know. Do I want to read this? Yeah, I'm gonna read this just because let's read it thing. So this is a date. What a relief you're not a crackhead, my Starbucks date deadpans. Two chicken shits to destigmatize crack? I deflect. Glad you're not a cop. Do I look like a cop? He counters. Cop-like. Across the wobbly cafe table, I read The Investment Banker from KC as if the power of observation can save me. Pink and white threads in a tight blue dress shirt stripe his chest like the broadest trans flag I've ever seen. Hair slick and silver, smart watch, shiny brown shoes. He's well groomed, too well groomed, I tell him. An obvious special ops unit to woo and entrap the trans. Why would law enforcement target the transgender community? He says. Serious, or besting me in dry banter. I'm stunned until he follows. Why do it? Despite the practice of gender affirming surgery in the West since at least the 7th century, care remains pathologized and paywalled. My date doesn't blink at the out of pocket cost of FFS, yet needs me to translate my next bodily revision from top surgery to boob job. Don't go too big, every guy warns, prefers their own delusions of womanhood. So I want to look natural, I tell him. Go big, he says, and stops my bitter Americano tongue. With fuchsia acrylics sharp enough to cut him, I graze his pink, soft-looking hands, tempting him to touch me. Maybe he's more than a fantasy, too, truly in town closing a $54 million deal on a company that's too small to run itself and too big not to go public. God, I hate that feeling, I snark, because guys with any money all have business deals and big boats and beach houses in Florida and cabins in Colorado to retreat from the hell they've created when not on the annual Disney trip with the kids. And because a single donation could keep a girl from the hustle, but then who would serve him? Want to name one? I ask, noting that men love to put their names on things, so why not my boobs? Do trans community service become a patron saint of whores? Think of it, he says, finally laughing. Mount Greg. My date slips his real name or another pseudonym, but I think of it. The mirage is too tempting. A man that would save me, even if as an extension of himself. Even if the narrative flip fails, I swallow what's his to persist, make him me, never not him again. I think that's it. I think I should shut the hell up. So thank you for
Well, don't feel that was amazing. I'm so grateful to know you, Crystal, and I'm so grateful that our paths crossed and that you've just given me personally like so much to think about in this talk, but I want to make sure that everyone in the room has a chance. And I apologize to make you enunciate so much. Oh, there's your reading list. Okay, great. If you want to share your slides with me, I can put them up on D2L if you
yeah, you got
if you want.
this.
Okay, and maybe we'll stop the recording if students don't want to be don't want to be recorded.
Yeah. How do
Pause
I
it. We
how
can
do I
actually pause it. I
um
think